$25 an hour to offset $200-300 an hour, you're never going to change the position that you're in. And that's less motivating. But again, you have to find a niche that you're good at, something that you're capable of doing. You can't just grab anything. You have to have something that you know what you're doing. And then you have to put forth the effort to promote to the world that you can do this just as good as the demand for it. And then, price it better than the competition. It is possible. It just takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. Sometimes it takes some capital investments. Now, Sunday, one of the other things that we do on Sunday is we talk about questions or comments from the fans. We have a lot of random questions that come about, and we try to entertain most of them as long as they're functioned appropriately, because, we do have some individuals that are not of the age of 18 that do pop up onto the show, and they really want to learn some stuff, and I really want to show them some things. So we ask that even if you're watching us from Twitter or Twitch, that you guys can come in and try to keep your comments positive, because this is a highly interactive podcast, and we do our best to get in there and give you guys as much information as possible so that you have something to work towards. Because, a lot of times in life, how you doing, Dylan? Good to see you, buddy. A lot of times in life, we find ourselves stuck in a rut where we don't know how to change because we don't know where to look. We don't know what questions to ask because we're not too sure what we need. Then all of a sudden you hear somebody talking about something that you never thought about. Then you start looking into it. And then when you start looking into it, you think, oh yeah, that's exactly what I need. Just when you ran out of all the answers to all the questions, I changed the questions. So this helps you start looking into some other ways to make yourselves better. And that's one of the things we want to do on this show is we want to empower people to be better, do better, and make better choices, in your personal life as well as in your professional life. So is everything. I was 3 minutes from the top of the hour, so I think that's my record start time so far. I'm gonna start trying to set the goal to try to get here 5 minutes before the show. Like try to start at 5 minutes before the show, so that if I'm 5 minutes late, I started on time. But I did say, improvements along the way. It just takes a lot of change. Hopefully your day's going well as well. The next thing you know, you're doing a daytime talk show. Look, I'm trying to avoid the daytime talk show. However, the traffic that I get on this channel actually does bode well first thing in the morning. How you doing, Slughorn? Good to be back, bro, man. Good to be back. So we're going to, so if I did step into the daytime show, the problem that I have with the daytime show is that I kind of wrap up my clientele first thing in the morning. And that would mean that I would have to rush my client off so that I could jump onto a podcast. And I'm just thinking that wouldn't be good for me, but then I'm tired either way and I'm trying to get some sleep. So I'm not thinking about that. Horace asks, he says, well, what are we talking about today? Well, we're going to be talking about the Black Hood mindset and potentially how that could be negatively impacting your ambition. So we're going to be talking about that today. It's like a hood mentality. It's that, impersonation of stereotypical Black behavior. And we're going to be talking about that today. We're going to be talking about how some aspects of it, while it may be admirable, it is not beneficial for you the way you think. Oh, yeah, exactly like those. Exactly like those. And okay, because so you've got the kids, they got the pants hanging off their behinds, they got the skinny jeans with the wife beater on, the clothes hanging off of them, all of this stuff, and bandanas and hats all over, and shoelaces untied. And I know when we was young, we used to get out there and do some stuff, something similar to it. We did it better than they did it because I mean they got the girl pants on. I'm gonna Uh, yeah, drill rap. They got the girl pants on with the skinny jeans, and they're trying to turn that into like a thug style. And we had baggy pants back in the '80s. We had baggy pants with a belt on, and we had the extra long white tees. We used to go way back in the day. He said horse no bell, or no horse no balls. Well, uh, so we see the way they do it now, and I mean, when we was young, we was like, man, I'll never be one of those old guys, but we didn't reach that level. We're like, man, it's just not working for us. So today I'm going to be talking about the mentality behind it, not just the attire, the mentality about it, your decision making in that area, and why deliberately choosing to conform into something like this would just negatively impact your ability to succeed. And so we're gonna start off by asking you guys a pretty interesting question, because I gotta tip things off before we start diving into things. But a pretty interesting question, guys. I know he came up with that ridiculous comment. He wants to step away from getting, but I don't know where Michael at. Michael late. But what if I told you guys uh, the very thing that helped you survive the street life back in the day is now the main thing that's holding you guys back? Yeah. And what if the armor that you were forced to build back in the day, piece by piece, just to see the next day, has now become the cage that is preventing you from succeeding? This is going to be some stuff right now. You see, I think it is due to the lack of having a father present for some. It's actually not that. While 18% of men get their children in this society, which bodes a lot to say that 82% of children are raised by women. And every complaint that we have about the upbringing of a child, we for some reason ignore they were not raised by a man. Any negative behavior that we have, any negative observations that we develop about the upbringing of a child, we ignore the and it's funny because the argument is that it is because the father wasn't there, right? The responsibility is being pushed off to the person that was not allowed to be there in the first place, the failures of the child's development. But before we even get into the black hood mentality, you do realize that out of 100% of men that fight for their children to be the fathers in their children's lives, only 18% succeed. The other 82% spend the entire childhood fighting against the female in possession of the child, fighting against the state, doing everything right, showing up, meeting those appointments, being there for the kid to the best of their ability, and they're never given an ounce of leverage into the child's life. The child has a shitty childhood. The child has a terrible upbringing. The child grows up, makes bad choices. We blame the absence of the father on the child's poor development. Now, whose fault is that? Is it the father's fault that the father was denied the right to be in the child's life? Or is it the fault of the adult that rejected the father in front of the child and prevented the child from having the father that she deserved? If the poor development of children in our society is due to the missing father that in 25, 24, 2020, 2017, they showing up where statistics are showing that 18% of the men that show up get their kids, and the other 82% of men that are showing up to be dads are being rejected, not because they're unfit, simply because they're unwelcome. Think about that real quick. Dylan said the answer is number 7. No, sir, it's not. I just arrived from the future. I greatly appreciate you. irony, but I can dig it. Soon we'll have, what's that? Tesla dads. That'll be funny. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Uh, is that I'm not saying that the father's fault at all. Growing up, my mom raised me and turned me against my dad from a young age. But that's exactly my point. That's exactly my point. You're saying the same thing that I'm saying. Um, and this leads to the negative exposure to psychological manipulation, guilt trips, all of this other stuff when the parent that has possession of the child sours the child through basically parental alienation to force the child to reject the other parent, which makes it harder for the other fit parent to be involved in the child's life because instead of everyone working together, they're teaching the child to work against the success of the father so that the father cannot be successful. And then when they've conditioned a child thoroughly to reject the father, now they can back off and say, well, I can't control her. It's a teenager, blah, blah, blah. But you have to understand is that when the child first was receiving the father, they were continuously forcing the child to reject the father. Now that the child is rejecting the father, the damage has already been done. The alienation has been set in. Now the child is self alienating, and it's easy for the alienating adult who agrees with the child's negative behavior now to back off and say, well, I can't do anything about it. Well, I know, because this is exactly what you wanted. This is the outcome that you wanted. So you don't have to do anything about it because now it's the child doing it, and you can step back and say it's not my fault because the child is doing it. But you conditioned the child to be this way, and that is something that in our society our court system isn't prepared for. Our court system does not have the capacity to take effective measures to protect children from non-visible abuse. You take the kids out of abusive situations when, well, some situations, because you got some situations where they can be breaking bones and nobody do anything and just say, oh, it happens. But in other situations, you have like the bruises and all the stuff like that that just keep coming up, and those kids get taken out of those homes. But children that are being psychologically and emotionally abused, those are the ones, they have no scars, they have no physical injuries that can be seen, and they assume the child is healthy. There's no physical damage that we can see from afar. That child is good there. The child is safe there, but the child is not. There's nothing that we can do about it because it takes years, and it sometimes takes a third, if not two-thirds of the child's childhood before you can make a difference. Usually by the time the father gets the child, the father's grabbing the child at 15, 16, 17 years old, and then trying to aid the child with coping through her childhood traumas as a young adult. But the core damage is still done, and without the proper therapy and large quantities of, uh, you know, coaching from the father to help them navigate these scenarios, they're going to be hindered. But today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different that's going to lead more into the conscious choice to adapt to this hood mentality aside from a poor parental upbringing. Dylan said, "Oh Lord, that is the story as old as time." Sad but true. Yeah, I'm agreeing with your point. He said, and my point is that the father was not rejected from the picture. The child may be more successful with both parents. Exactly. Look, special shout out. He owned it. He talking. We're talking in different time slots because I'm 3 seconds ahead of him reading his message from 5 minutes ago. But we on the same point with that. And you're right. We should have way more advocates for mandatory parenthood. Actually, statistics show that fathers do a better job at raising children. Just saying, because men are coming off of logic and reason. So there's going to be negotiations there. You're going to earn what you get from the parent. You're going to, whether it's respect, whether it's extra benefits, you're going to earn what you get. You're going to provide a level of cooperation. You're going to learn how to negotiate and navigate the things that you want from the person who has more resources than you and has more control over the situation than you, which actually teaches you better development skills. Because when you get into business, when you get into life, you're not going to be in the world of business just using emotional manipulation. Oh yeah, in politics you can use blackmail. In politics you can use uh, uh, scandals and all this other stuff. You can leverage deep dark secrets of somebody else, but a lot of deals where you don't know nothing about the person you're doing business with, you just know that they have what you want and you might have something that they want. You can't just stomp your feet and cross your arms and refuse to agree because you don't think the deal is in your favor. Because at the end of the day, you'll walk away with nothing instead of walking away with something. As long as you get enough out of the deal to overshoot the quantity of effort put into the deal, you don't have to get everything that you were expecting out of the deal, but you got more than what you could have gotten. A true good business deal typically resolves itself where either both parties are reasonably satisfied with the outcome or both parties are reasonably dissatisfied with the outcome because you gave up more than what you wanted to give up in order to get what you needed, but you got what you needed. Or in the other sense, you didn't have to give up as much as you thought you needed to give up to get what you needed, and you're satisfied with what you got and how much you had to put out to get it. You know, as long as one of those two outcomes came about, that was a good deal. You know, a lot of big business millionaire mindsets will take a large quantity of settlement money and put it into a high interest or high stock portfolio scenario, knowing that what we're about to do could cost us millions. And they will put the estimated settlement money aside into an account that turns over money for so long. Then, when the lawsuit comes out, the only job the attorney is supposed to do is stall to a settlement because we already know that this is wrong. We already know that we're going to have to pay. But if we know that we're going to have to pay, we might as well start putting money aside so that when somebody come to collect, we got the money to give. See what I'm saying? And it doesn't stop them from doing wrong. It just lets them know that, well, I'm going to leverage this by delay. It is what it is. So, you know, a lot of us grew up believing that being hard was the only way to make it, especially if we 80s babies and we was in the 90s when they started doing that war on drugs, zero crime tolerance scenario. And that's showing no fear and trusting no one, using that as a shield. Keep your head on the swivel. I know y'all hear that on a lot, right? A lot of times in a lot of different places. And for a while, it was a way to get around. It's how you got through your teenage years. Got you through nights where sirens was the only lullaby, and through days where a wrong look could be an invitation to violence. Yeah, you see it all the time, especially in a lot of the black cultures. You believe that every black person knows each other instinctively. We don't. The truth of the matter is that if you stare at somebody for more than 3 seconds without speaking, you are instigating a fight. Nobody knew that. Because when you give that stare down, you're having a mental countdown, a clock in your mind as to when you're going to snuff this person in the mouth. So when you have that look, when you guys make eye contact, you notice, soon as you realize they're looking at you, 2, 3, so. Hey, we ain't got no problems now. Yeah, bro. That's that one nod, that one what's up. That's it. You just letting them know we good, right? We don't got no beef. They looking at you and they see that what's up. You get them another. They give you a what's up. You already know it's all good, and y'all just keep passing that one look, right? And that armor work. So that's what I believe too. Special shout out to Nemo. But what no one tells you is that this armor gets heavy. Building a stern image of the lack of emotion, the lack of playfulness, the serious, overly serious situation, type behavior. Over time, it fuses to your skin. It stops protecting you from the world and starts preventing you from connecting with it. Because if you're always in the building, y'all know the rules we used to go by. Back to the wall, always looking. You know what that is? Security. You sitting there, back to the wall, so that nobody can sneak up on you. Always looking, watching what everybody else is doing, not getting in there and enjoying yourself, just to make sure that nobody's coming your way to cause a problem. You find yourself at a club with your foot up against the wall, sipping on a drink, watching everybody else having a good time because you are supposed to always be on guard. Tonight's show is about that cage, okay? And it's about how that hood mentality was forged in the fires of American policy and how we can learn to melt down that cage and reshape the steel of our resilience into a key for real success. So let's be clear from the start before we get started. You know, when we talk about the Black hood mentality, we're not talking about something inherent to being a Black person. Okay. So this isn't an attack. It isn't an indictment. Think of it as a diagnosis because it's a behavior pattern now, right? And this is an honest look at a set of survival skills, attitudes, and behaviors born out of necessity in environments of chronic poverty and systemic neglect. Okay. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Oh, he said it's a stress. Oh, you be jamming on some stuff, boy. You just be sitting over there listening to some Outcasts and just 3-6 Mafia and just now this Black hood mentality, it's what psychologists might call a series of trauma responses, behaviors that include hypervigilance, a deep-seated mistrust of institutions, and the projection of a tough exterior to ward off threats. For generations, these attitudes served a purpose because in neighborhoods where the system had checked out, the community had to create its own rules. Porch watchers, church basements. So, before we go further, because we also have the block parties that became the de facto government, the source of safety and connections in your communities. We got to think about porch watchers. Porch watchers are people who used to sit on the porch and their whole job was to keep a watch out for the neighborhood to make sure that the people in the neighborhood were safe. Now, people are just sitting out on the porch doing nothing, smoking a blunt, talking about how they ain't got nothing in life and how the system is keeping them down, but they don't never go out and try to find them a better job. Back in the day, typically around the segregation area, we had people who used to sit out on the porch and they would watch the kids play out in the street to make sure nobody did nothing to the kids. They would watch the wives come home from work to make sure that nothing happened to the wives. They would watch their brothers to make sure that the wrong folk don't show up with flaming torches and pit bulls and start attacking folk in the street. That's what the porch watchers was out there doing. Okay. This was a different time. But over time, that type of safety, because block parties at the house was a bunch of people getting together with a bunch of people who knew each other, would hang out and have a good time in the safety of their neighborhood instead of going out into an area where they weren't welcome and trying to have a good time with strangers. Now, warped by media stereotypes and the crushing weight of ongoing neglect, the survival code that we used to live by begun to curdle. It's blurred the lines between a survivor and being a statistic, a stereotype. And the thing is that If you didn't have to grow up in that type of neighborhood, there is no reason why you should emulate that type of behavior. If you were in that type of neighborhood and you didn't have to emulate that type of behavior, there is no reason why you should choose to emulate that type of behavior. Because the hood mentality is a paradox. It's the source of an incredible, unbreakable resilience, but it's also a mindset that can convince you to reject opportunities because they feel like selling out. And y'all know we've heard that before. When you go from being in the streets and running with your bros to getting a high paying job and they call you a sellout to the man. It's the street smarts that can help you read a dangerous situation, right? But it's also the defensiveness that can cause you to misread constructive criticism at work as a personal attack. It's the loyalty that builds unshakable bonds, but it's also the no switching culture that allows violence to fester in our own backyards. You have to take sides and you have to stay that way your whole life. That's not the mentality that you should emulate. You shouldn't have to take it on. If you've got it, tonight, we're going to show you about understanding the duality of it. And if you don't got it, tonight, we're also going to give you more information as to why you shouldn't start trying to pretend like this is who you are. And we're going to explore the layers and move past blame and shame so that we can get past what is often suffocating this conversation. Okay. Michael says a porch watcher usually referred to a Southern social tradition, especially in the older generation. Yeah, because the systemic violations that we were experiencing culturally were more often happening in the South, where the segregation was more dominant than in the North. So it was not so much a social tradition, it was a social practice of safety. And then it became uh, a multicultural admiration that turned into a trend. But it originally was developed to keep the community safe. Which, imagine the 40s with Neighborhood Watch. This would be the first generation of Neighborhood Watch. Now in 2025, you've got some Karen walking around with a flashlight and pepper spray all up in your garbage can, checking out your trash so that she can come and tell you about something that you're not supposed to have in your trash can because of your HOA, talking about Neighborhood Watch. But back in the days where folks used to come up missing and be found swinging from a tree the next morning, Neighborhood Watch was way more important than what it is now. Still important. It's just the type of violence that we used to have back in the day. It's not the type of violence that we have in today's days. It says your reference is to ghetto. Well, you're going to call it the ghetto. It's not necessarily the ghetto. It's the low income environments that are usually more impacted by crime. And a lot of times the crime is not by the people. Sometimes the crime is by the government that is involved in this in the city. Because we back in those days, we had law enforcement that wasn't behaving as well as they are now, which is a little bit more of an improvement, but it still needs a lot of improvement. Still needs a lot of improvement. And it's wild because you have generations of negative behavior. You have generations of negative behavior. And when they join the force, they adapt and become the exact thing that they were supposed to be putting a stop to. No matter how much they try not to, they end up through experience becoming exactly the person they did not want to see in their neighborhood. God forbid they're put back into their neighborhood to do a beat. It's terrible. Is there two different use of them of the term? Well, no, no, there isn't two different uses of the term. It's the same use. The ghetto is actually more like the hood. It is not more like, it is exactly the hood. And ghetto as a behavior pattern is identifying the behavior of the people in that neighborhood. Um, so a low income, low educated environment might be identified as a ghetto environment. And then you take that person out of that environment and put them into a highly educated, highly profitable environment, and they don't know how to behave anything other than the behavior from where they came from. So identifying a behavior as ghetto is identifying a low income, low educated mentality in a person that has come out of a low income, low educated environment. But it is not two different uses of the same term. It's the same use. It's identifying the behavior that comes from a specific location. The same way New Yorkers, you have a behavior, a specific type of behavior that happens in New York. And they take that behavior with them when they leave New York. So you can identify a New Yorker, a person from New York with a behavior from New York, not in New York, behaving as if they're still in New York, a New Yorker. Just because they put a spin to it, loud rap music, girls in their underwear shaking their behinds, uh, uh, money all over the place, alcohol everywhere, and then call it ghetto fabulous. Still low income, low educated, popular. Got to think about that. He said Michael Donald was the last black man hanged in America in 1981 by the KKK. Okay, but that is not the last person that was swung from a tree. So if you just learned that today, now, because you got to understand, the last black man hung by a racial activist group versus the last minority hung in the United States that was not delivered by the US government as a form of justice for a crime that they were convicted from, two different things. You'll come to find out that the last person hung in the United States, if I remember correctly, was in St. Louis. And it was in the 2000s, if I remember correctly. Right? So something close to when the internet was developed, if I remember correctly, uh, that a man was swinging from a tree in St. Louis. You know, you talked about that because that we're not talking about that, but that is the reason why that type of behavior developed. But let's see, just to kind of tiptoe on this. Okay, so they have one Billy Bailey that was executed in January 2025. Um, so we gotta be specific now, because you gotta ask the right questions. because they're talking about in the state of Delaware. But that's not what I was talking about. Oh, okay. So you got to go into lynching. So that's not giving me a specific date on the lynching thing. Well, moving on, because I want to keep going with today's topic so that we can get into some of the things that we can learn and improve from that. You say, you mean you can take the city out of a girl, but you can't take uh, the country? No, actually, Michael, the ideology is that you can take a person out of the hood, but you can't take the hood out of the person. That is more along the lines of where that reference comes from. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Because first, we're going to be walking through the systemic blueprint that designed the American hood uh, mentality, because you can't understand the mindset without understanding the world it created. We're going to explore historical policies and economic decisions that built these isolated communities. And then we're going to explain the unwritten rules of the street, uh, which is the psychological code that governs daily life. And then we're going to be explaining that code, while designed for survival, how that code can be a form of emotional incarceration, limiting our potential and sabotaging our success. Then finally, most importantly, we're going to lay out a roadmap for transformation. This isn't about forgetting where you came from. It's about learning how to separate the skills from the scars. And it's about taking the resilience and the grit and the social intelligence forged in the toughness of the environments that you grew up in, and repurposing them from tools, from the that form of mere survival, and turn it into the tools and instruments of profound success. So we're going to explore how to turn that armor back into an asset, and understand the software, which is the mindset. You first have to understand the hardware, which was the environment. Now, the hood wasn't an accident. It didn't just appear. It was designed. It was engineered through decades of deliberate policy and systemic racism that drew lines on maps, and in doing so, drew lines through lives and destinies. So if you've ever wondered why so many Black communities are concentrated in areas with underfunded schools, crumbling infrastructures, and lack of economic opportunities, the answer isn't a coincidence. It's history. Okay. So let's start with the most infamous um, architectural tool, redlining. Imagine a map of your city in the 1930s. The federal government, through agencies uh, like the Homeowners Loan Corporation and the Federal Housing Administration, which are the ones that we use today to make so much money in real estate, were literally colored in neighborhoods. Green and blue meant desirable for investment. Yellow meant declining, and red meant hazardous, now identified in modern society as at-risk communities. Right? Put a political spin to it. Neighborhoods with even a small Black population are almost invariably colored red. And this wasn't just a suggestion, It was a devastating blow for economic development. So a red line on a map meant banks were strongly discouraged from issuing federally backed mortgages in that area, effectively cutting off the flow of capital that allows communities to thrive. And it meant that countless Black families, even with stable incomes, were structurally disadvantaged and systematically denied the primary tools for building generational wealth in America, which is home ownership. At the same time, the government was actively subsidizing the creation of white suburbs. Loans were readily available for white families to leave the cities for newly built homes with yards and brand new schools. And this was that gentrification from the urban area, that is the ghetto, the slums, the street, the inner city, to outside of the city, suburban areas. That's where the suburbs came from. And then you had the rural areas were the biggest of the biggest houses. And gentrification is that the prices of the stuff further away from the city was more expensive than the prices of the stuff in the inner city. People back then would be around all the noise and all the construction. You put all of the poor people in that area, and then you take all of the rich people and move them away from all of that. Gentrification changes every 10 to 20 years, and now everybody's flocking into the inner city, so they're building up the inner city, raising the prices of the inner city, and then they're forcing all of the poor people to the outskirts of the city. Exactly, the other side of the tracks. And isn't it funny that that saying comes out, and there was a train track that divided the financially successful from the financially unsuccessful? Didn't you notice strategically in most cities, in most states in the United States, that you will find a Martin Luther King Jr. drive right before the poor side of society? MLK, after that, is inherently poor. Isn't that interesting? Just ironic that you can drive over MLK Drive and everything looks so different. This mass exodus is what we called the white flag. But it wasn't just flight, it was a siphoning of resources, because as white families and businesses left, they took the tax dollars with them, and the city's infrastructure began to crumble. Services were cut, the tax base that funded the schools, parks, and sanitation evaporated, leaving the newly segregated Black communities isolated and under resourced. And the story of the hood is largely defined not by the people in it, but by the investment that was deliberately kept out of it. Okay. And this wasn't just a northern phenomenon. In the South, the legacy of Jim Crow created a parallel system of economic apartheid, and Black people were excluded from well-paying jobs, qualified educations, and meaningful participation in the economy. So when millions of Black families moved north during the Great Migration, seeking opportunity and fleeing terror, they were often funneled into these red-lined, resource-deprived urban corridors, and they were trapped. The very system that was supposed to offer a path to the American dream instead created a maze with a few exits in it. Now, this economic strangulation had profound psychological consequences. When traditional paths to success are blocked, people are forced to find alternatives. And with the formal economic feeling like a closed door, an informal underground economic society began to flourish out of necessity. And this is where the glorification of the hustle and fast money take root. Because since we couldn't get regular jobs to pay the bills, we had to find other means, alternative, unorthodox ways to make money. And those unorthodox ways to make money were identified as hustles because they're not traditional jobs. We now have developed an entire culture of hustle mentality because nobody, regardless of their race, can get a high paying traditional job. He says sell drugs, sell anything, sell drugs, sell stolen property, sell anything, doing odds and ends jobs, because stealing stuff could be a job in and of itself, because you need money, and anybody who's willing to pay a reduced rate to get certain quality stuff that they otherwise would not have been able to afford to buy would buy stolen goods from the person who stole the goods, and the person who stole the goods would get money to take care of their stuff. And that is where the high crime came from. It's one of the reasons why the laws came out where even being in possession of a stolen item, even if you didn't take it, just having it puts you in the crime with the person who stole it, because possession is 9/10 of the law. And if you're caught in possession of a stolen item, you go to jail for being in possession of that stolen item. And that was done to discourage people from buying stolen items, because if it was able to be determined that the items in your possession were stolen, you'd be in trouble for it, right? But this struggle to get resources, it wasn't born from the lack of morals. It was born from the lack of options. Long-term planning feels like a fantasy when your daily reality is a struggle for survival. You focus on what's in front of you, on getting by any way you can, by any means necessary, like Michael X said. And because the system had taught you that the future isn't promised and that its institutions are not designed for you, you now start thinking about the most reckless ways to get it done. And we add two more powerful ingredients to this toxic brew: over policing and media stereotypes. The same communities that were starved of resources were often flooded with law enforcement. But for many residents, the police weren't there to protect or serve at all. Their primary role was often seen as containment and control. This created an adversarial relationship from the start. So the justice system became another institution that was seen, with good reason, as working against the community, not for it. At the same time, much of the media painted a picture of these neighborhoods as inherently violent and chaotic. News, movies, music often amplified the most extreme aspects of hood life, creating a uh, caricature that the rest of the world, and eventually even some within the community, began to accept as reality. These stereotypes frame the hood as dangerous, which can lead to internalized devaluation and a rebellion against a so-called mainstream norms. Oh yeah, it is a prison without walls. It is an understanding that you're not going to make it, so you have to survive until you find another way to get out of this area. Now, the funny thing about it is that while the choices you make while you're in this scenario can negatively impact your opportunities when you get out of the scenario, but you're not thinking about that while you're in the scenario. Because every time you get arrested, that goes on your criminal record or your arrest record. Every time you're convicted, that goes on your criminal record, but they call your arrest record your criminal record, even though you don't have to commit a crime to have an arrest record. You just have to be arrested. And systemically, Black people were arrested just for being Black, just for being black and outside, not necessarily for committing a crime. And in the 80s and 90s, you still had black people, young black men, getting arrested repetitively. And even now in 2025, they have laws to prevent you from expunging unjustifiable arrests off your record. They'll only give you like one in some scenarios if you can show a pattern of behavior where the arrests were close enough together, where you can convince the judge to wipe all of them. Then they're likely to get rid of all of them. But if you're only capable of getting them to get rid of one out of all the ones that you got, you have to pick the worst one and get rid of that one to make it less damning on you. See what I'm saying? And it's crazy that they do that. But this narrative is incredibly damaging. It creates self-fulfilling prophecies, because if you're taught that you're only going to be a failure, and then you start making bad choices because you think you'll never be successful, once you failed at life, you'll look back and recognize that it was foreseen that you were going to fail. If the world tells you that you are a threat, you might start to believe it. You adopt a posture of toughness as a defense mechanism. If the world tells you that your neighborhood is a place of failure, your ambitions can feel like a betrayal. And today, we see the final cruel twist of this story, the gentrification that I was talking to you guys about. Because after decades of disinvestment, those same hazardous neighborhoods are now seen as prime real estate, economic development zones. Developers are sweeping in now. Property values are starting to soar up. And the cycle of displacement is beginning again. But this time, it comes with a psychological sting, because the very culture that was created in the isolation, the very identity that was forged in the fires of neglect, is now being erased or commodified, idolized, emulized. The murals are painted over. The corner stores are replaced by cafes. The sense of community is fractured, because the people who can't afford to pay for the increased rents are going to move to cheaper neighborhoods. Because they can't get better paying jobs, they're going to voluntarily move back into another hood environment with the low cost of living capability, so that they can afford to cover that standard of living. For many, this feels like the ultimate eraser, leading to a defense clinging to the hood mentality. And that defensiveness is as the last basin of authentic identity that they can identify, that they can recognize. And it's a tragic irony, because an identity created by forced segregation is now under threat from market pressures that displace long-term residents. Understanding this history is not about making excuses. It's about providing context. The hood mentality is not some mysterious culture pathology. It's a logical, and it's often painful, adaptations to a deliberately hostile environment. It is a ghost in the machine that America built intentionally. This isn't even accidentally. You say you weren't raised in the hood. That is the response that some people told their kids to not behave in a negative fashion. Don't behave like that. You weren't raised in a hood. I know all of y'all sitting over here like, yep, I heard that before. If the systemic factors we just discussed are the architecture of the hood, then the hood mentality is the underwritten building code. It's a set of psychological and social rules developed to navigate a world defined by scarcity, danger, and institutional neglect. These are common patterns, not universal traits, absorbed through observation and painful experience. They are passed down from one generation to the next, not as wisdom, but as a warning. So let's break down this code to understand how it functions and how it can ultimately trap you. Now, the first and most fundamental rule for many is hypervigilance. Always keep your head on a swivel. Now, this is the state of being constantly on guard, scanning your environment for threats. It's walking down the street with your senses turned up to 11 out of 10. You notice the car that circled the block twice, even though they might have just been looking for a place to park. You analyze the body language of the group on the corner. You process the tone of a simple what's up to determine if it's a greeting or a challenge. Because ideally, changing your tone of voice when you say what's up changes it from being a hello to I'm going to beat you up. Ain't that something else? In an environment where violence can erupt without warning, this isn't paranoia, it's a critical survival skill. And the problem is, this switch is hard to turn off. It can become your default setting. You carry it with you from the street into the classroom, the workplace, and your home, which means now you're showing it to your kids. A manager's constructive criticism is no longer feedback, it's perceived as disrespect. A partner's question isn't a simple inquiry, it's an accusation. Think about that for a second, ladies. Y'all might have grew up in an environment that challenged your logic so much that when your partner just mentions something, you take it to heart like they're devaluing you as a person when in fact they were just trying to chime in. You might find, men and women alike, your brain has been wired to see threats everywhere. And this constant state of high alert is exhausting. It makes genuine connections. And it also makes trust almost impossible because you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Is it toxic environments? Yes, truly, truly toxic environments. Because you can't choose where you were born. You can't choose what family you're born into. You can choose where you end up as an adult in the future. How you doing, Ericium? No, I didn't check SMX today because they were actually talking about the Black Hood mentality. So we're going to be covering some stock options that we can invest in tomorrow. And then we're going to be talking about some stock options that we can tiptoe through for upcoming weeks. And while SMX is a growth stock, not a dividend stock, from what I understand, buying into SMX is going to be a interesting thing to look into on our Tuesday night show. So I'll definitely make sure that I squeeze in some information about SMX on Tuesday night show. Now, this leads directly to the second rule: projecting toughness and emotional suppression. So, in a world that feels governed by survival of the fittest, vulnerability can seem like a liability. Showing fear, sadness, or confusion can be seen as weakness, making you a target. So many learn to build a facade of hardness. And that is where the mannerisms and behavior traits come from. You adapt a certain walk, a certain way to talk, a stare that says, don't mess with me. And this is what some have called emotional incarceration. You lock your true feelings away because you believe they are a threat to your survival. Strength becomes synonymous with being impenetrable. And this is particularly devastating for the Black men who already battle social stereotypes that paint them as aggressive. He says probably day trade stock. We'll find out. I'll look it up and then I'll let you know. He said, is it borderline PTSD? No, by far it is not borderline. It is 100% PTSD. And that is not just PTSD, it is complex PTSD. And complex PTSD is after you have experienced a trauma. Post trauma, you re traumatize yourself by putting yourself in a familiar traumatizing scenario again and again and again. Complex PTSD. Um, it's an example that people don't like to hear, but take a person that's been assaulted, and then that person goes into prostitution. Self re-traumatization after the original trauma. It went from being not a choice to being a choice. So it's not borderline. Borderline PTSD is like walking past an arrest and some of the mace got in your eye, and now you're kind of a little weary when the police pull out the pepper spray because you don't want to be downwind of it. Kind of borderline PTSD. I don't want to be downtown when the club's in because they start riots. Borderline PTSD. What we're talking about is full blown trauma that has become an institutionalized behavior pattern that allows you to re-traumatize yourself by continuously keeping you in a toxic mentality, in a toxic environment, fueling that toxic environment with toxic behavior, which provides a toxic environment for the next person, where the next person is projecting the same toxic environment back to you because that's all y'all know how to do. The hood mentality can force them to lean into the caricature of the overly aggressive Black man as armor to protect them from what they perceive to be what could turn out to be a social attack. But that armor prevents anyone from seeing the real person underneath. It can stop you from asking for help, for admitting when you're hurt, and from showing affection without feeling like you're compromising your manhood. It isolates you in your own performance of strength. And it actually, in a way, starts becoming a social expectation. Because those women that are after the strong Black man that presents this image, that man cannot be vulnerable. He cannot express weakness. He cannot express sadness because he is no longer that impenetrable hard rock of a man that can't be broken by society. When the man's been broken for decades, he's just never had the capabilities to put himself back together. It it isolates you in your own performance. The third rule of the hood mentality is the ethos of get over any way you can. Get over any way you can. The fundamental basis of capitalism. This is a direct and logical consequence of living in a system you perceive as rigged. Bootleg phones, uh, fraudulent gift cards, selling your food stamps, pawning stolen items for quick cash, however you can. When you see the legal, educational, and economic systems failing your community time and time again, the incentive to play by their rules can disappear. This deep seated institutional distrust can breed a mentality that views rules as suggestions and loopholes as opportunities. For example, instead of stealing something in your own neighborhood, you didn't go cross the tracks and go steal something out of their neighborhood. Then come back and sell it in your neighborhood, make you some money. This can foster a certain street smarts. Street smarts wasn't always tactical living. Street smarts technically is tactical living, but it wasn't always a coined term for tactical living. Street smarts was a way to get over on a situation while still being disadvantaged. But it also blurs the lines between legitimate resourcefulness and outright criminality. It can normalize breaking the law because the law itself is seen as unjust. It glorifies the hustle, the quick score, over the slow, patient work of building a career or a business. Being an OnlyFans girl instead of being a seamstress, being an exotic dancer instead of being a lawyer, being an escort instead of being a teacher. The mindset often prioritizes short term gains over long term stability because survival mode is, by definition, focused only on the immediate present because you're not going to live long enough to see the future. That is the dynamic that you have. Y'all remember the movie Hustle and Flow, right? Hard out here for a pimp, right? Finally, all of these rules can be policed by a powerful internal mechanism: peer pressure and the fear of selling out. The community that provides a sense of belonging can also become a source of intense pressure to conform. This is the idea of keeping it real, maintaining the hood behavior. But too often, keeping it real can mean staying stuck. It can mean a young man who excels in school is accused of acting white. It can mean a young woman who's code switching to navigate a professional environment is seen as fake. This pressure is immense because people always want to belong, especially in the young generation. They can feel forced to choose between fitting in with their peers and pursuing opportunities that might lead them out of the hood. And this creates a devastating identity trap where success becomes equated with betrayal. This is where there's no switching. The no switching code becomes so destructive. What may have started as a rational pact of solidarity against a hostile police force can mature into a code of silence that protects criminals and allows violence to plague the community from within. Y'all remember snitches get stitches? I ain't no rat. Y'all forget. I'm not going to get my homeboy hung for something he didn't do. It's different from I'm not going to join the crime and then rat out everybody else who committed the crime. The no snitching policy was supposed to be to not be involved in the crime and then rat out everybody that was in the crime. Reporting the truth. Your friend was here the whole time. He wasn't involved in what was going on because he really was there the whole time. It's not snitching. It's identifying the fact that the person that they're after doesn't meet the description of the person that they're holding, because the person that they're holding has an alibi. But if you don't snitch, you're not willing to tell the truth about that person's whereabouts, which allows the criminal to get away and an innocent man to go to jail because the police don't have the motivation to investigate. It's crazy. Isn't selling out just an example of envy for somebody successful? Yes. The accusation of selling out always comes from the person who never tried to achieve. The person being accused of selling out is a person who chose to live a better life than the one they were born into. And battling the stereotypes. You're supposed to live and die in the hood, right? At a young age, ideally. Trying to get by the best that you can becomes the image of your mentality. And when some people find another way, a better way, a safer way to live a longer, safer, healthier life in a different environment, they're considered traitors to the code. Then when you leave and never come back, you forgot where you came from. It's not always the case. You just don't want to live a life of poverty and struggle. So you move to a more fruitful location. This is a prime example of how a survival tactic, when taken to its extreme, becomes an act of self-sabotage. Now, these four patterns, hypervigilance, emotional suppression, hustler's ethos, and intense peer pressure, form the core of the hood mentality. And they can create a closed loop of systems that reinforces itself because a hostile environment creates the need for the code. And the code, in turn, can perpetuate behaviors that can keep individuals and the community trapped in a cycle of dysfunction and a limited opportunity. Because if you're putting off the perception of hostility in an environment, each person is contributing to their own individual perception. It's a survival kit that for many has long outlived its usefulness. And for a long time, you might not even realize that you're in a cage. The armor feels like a part of you. The survivor code feels like common sense. But then moments of friction start to happen. You get a promotion at work, and instead of pure joy, you feel a knot of anxiety. You try to have a default conversation with a partner, just as a simple, challenging conversation with your partner, but you find yourself switching back to angry or shutting down because vulnerability feels too dangerous. These are the moments when you begin to feel the bars of the cage. This is where the hood mentality stops being a shield and starts being a shackle, actively sabotaging your success, your relationships, and your peace of mind. So let's talk about how this plays out in the real world, starting with opportunity and career. Now, the hyper vigilance and defensiveness that kept you safe on your block can be toxic in a professional environment. It's different from keeping yourself safe on the block and keeping yourself with a job in a professional atmosphere. A boss that gives you pointed feedback to help you grow is testing you. They're investing in you. But the hood mentality can interpret that as disrespect. You get defensive, you push back. You're trying to protect your pride, but you may actually be shutting down a vital channel for mentorship. You can become known as difficult, and opportunities start to dry up, confirming your pre existing belief that the system is rigged against you. And it's a vicious cycle. Furthermore, the short term focus of the hustle mindset is the enemy of long term career building because a career isn't a single score. It isn't the diamonds on display. It isn't the pair of Jordans that's outside the store where you can just snatch and run. It's a marathon of consistent effort and strategic patience, which is why I tell you guys that we have to put a lot of effort into our 20-year plan to make ourselves overall successful. And if you started here in 2025, it's going to be 2045 before you're successful. If you're 40 right now, by 60, you should see the success. And if you stay focused on it, you don't get distracted by it, you might see enough success by the time you're 50 to motivate you to keep going till you're 60 if you started at 40. But think about this though. The hood mentality can crave immediate results. And this can lead to impatience, which leads you to jumping from job to job without building real expertise, or to reject valuable but unpaid internships because they don't put money in your pocket right now. A person I know was offered a chance to shadow a top executive, an invaluable opportunity. They turned it down because it meant a few extra hours a week without extra pay. They saw it as being taken advantage of, not as an investment in their future. The mindset focused on immediate value couldn't compute the long-term strategic advantage. Then there was a profound impact on your identity and your mental health. because a hood mentality can create powerful identity traps. It can present a very narrow definition of what it means to be black and real. When you start to succeed in ways that doesn't fit the mold, you can experience a kind of psychological uh, dissonance. You feel like a fraud, and in situations, you feel like you're code switching at your corporate job, and you feel like you're living a double life in this particular type of dynamic. And there's a constant fear of being exposed, that your colleagues will disapprove the real you, or worse, that your people back home will accuse you of becoming one of them, the man. And this internal conflict becomes extremely exhausting as well. This constant stress and internal conflict take a massive toll. Living in a state of hypervigilance is a recognized trauma response. It keeps you nervous. It keeps your nervous system in a perpetual state of fight or flight, which can lead to severe anxiety, depression, PTSD, ongoing PTSD, and a host of psychological illnesses like high blood pressure and heart disease, which is common traits in the Black community. You're walking around with the emotional baggage of a soldier in a war zone, except the war zone is only in your mind. The armor you build to protect yourself from external threats ends up causing deep internal damage. Finally, the cage of the hood mentality can devastate your personal relationships. The same emotional suppression that made you seem strong on the streets can make you appear cold and distant to the people who love you the most. Your partner can't connect with you because you've walled off your feelings. Your children may only see your tough exterior. You demand respect, but you struggle to offer trust. The no switching code in a family context means refusing to hold each other accountable for destructive behavior, allowing cycles of abuse or addiction to continue unchecked under a banner of misguided loyalties. So I'm going to let you keep screwing up because I'm loyal to who you are. The mindset that prioritizes reputation above all else, earning your stripes, can poison the well of genuine human connection. You can be in a room full of people who love you and feel completely alone, even though you're the center of attention. At a certain point, the cost becomes far too high. The community self starts to grow weary, and this intra community frustration with the self destructive aspects of the hood mentality is a phenomenon some have controversially retermed as Black fatigue. Originally, the term was coined by Mary Frances Whitters to describe the exhaustion Black people feel from enduring constant racism. And this new usage points to the collective sigh of a people tired of seeing potential squandered, the grief of mothers burying their children, and the exhaustion of hearing the same excuses for the same destructive behaviors generation after generation. This fatigue is a critical turning point. It's the moment a community begins to say, we acknowledge the history, but we can no longer accept this as our destiny. Now, it's the recognition that personal accountability must coexist with the critique of systemic injustice. It is the crack in the walls of the cage. Recognizing the cage is the first step, but the most crucial step is realizing you hold the power to forge the key to get yourself out of that cage. The very material that makes up the bars of the cage, the grit, the resilience, the street smarts, is the same materials you can use to create your freedom. This isn't about rejecting your past. It's about alchemy, equivalent exchange. It's about transforming the raw elements of your survival into polished, powerful tools for success. And the process begins with critical reflection. You have to be willing to put your own mindset under a microscope. And this requires radical honesty. You must start to consciously separate programmed responses from your authentic self. Ask yourself the hard questions. Is this reaction coming from a place of present reality, or is it an echo of past trauma? Is this decision based on a long-term goal, or is it a short-term survival impulse? You can't change a program you don't know is running. Once you begin this reflection, you can start the work of reframing your traits. This is where the magic happens. You don't discard the skills learned, you repurpose them. Take hypervigilance. In its raw form, it's a source of anxiety. But when you reframe it, it becomes exceptional social intelligence. That ability to scan a room and instantly read power dynamics and unspoken tensions is a superpower in the corporate world. It can make you a master negotiator. It helps you anticipate a client's needs. The same skill that helps you detect a threat on the corner can help you detect an opportunity in the boardroom. Consider the normalization of risk. On the streets, this can lead to devastating consequences. But when you channel that same tolerance for risk into a professional context, it becomes bold entrepreneurship. Bold entrepreneurship. People who have never experienced true instability are often paralyzed by the fear of failure. They won't start a business because it's too risky. But you may have seen way worse this morning. Okay? You understand that safety is an illusion and that failure is often just a stepping stone. And you might have the stomach to take calculated risks that can lead to massive rewards because you don't have much to lose. You can bet on yourself because you've survived betting against the odds your entire life. So what about code switching? For long and so long, it may have felt like a source of shame, but reframing it, becoming adaptable leadership, oh yeah, that's golden. The ability to move seamlessly between different worlds, to speak the language of the streets and the language of the C-suite is an incredibly rare and valuable asset. It makes you a bridge. It allows you to connect with a diverse range of people, from the janitor to the CEO. And this adaptability, born from necessity, can make you a unequally effective leader, and a very unique one at that. Even the deep-seated value of community bonds can be transformed. In its negative form, it can manifest as the no snitching code. But when you purify it, it can become the foundation for powerful network building and social activisms. That fierce loyalty can be channeled into creative business collectives, mentorship programs, and community organizations that fight for systemic change. You know how to build a tribe. So now you can build it for progress. This transformation is not theoretical. It happens every day. Look at stories like that of Mark L. Russell, who talks about applying the principles of hustling, marketing, and leadership that he learned on the streets to become a multi-millionaire CEO. Or consider the countless stories like that of Rob, a man who grew up in the hood and transformed his anger into a system where the academic drive to earn a PhD in mathematics becomes a direct challenge of the stereotype that he was told to accept. These are the real examples of alchemy that we're talking about today. Is that the school failed to teach kids that failure is just a learning experience that is necessary to succeed. That is true. And while teachers fail to teach kids, the parents fail to teach the kids too, which is what makes it so hard for the teachers to teach the kids, because a lot of the kids, especially the ones that go to public school, are sent to school for the free lunch program, or sent to school to be the babysitter for the kids until the parents get off from work, or aren't taught how to behave appropriately and go to school for a common purpose of growth and improvement. Then the schools with lack of resources do not have the motivation or capability to teach the children financial knowledge. Then you now have a new problem, because since mom or mom and dad in a two-parent household doesn't have the knowledge to teach their kids financial literacy, the kids grow up making a bunch of financial mistakes, losing hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime, end up living above their financial means, fall into a relationship with somebody who can barely keep the means together, end up with more children that further exhaust their financial status, and then their kids don't have the financial knowledge because their parents don't have the financial knowledge, because their grandparents don't have the financial knowledge. And here's the funny part. Some schools have teachers that grew up in that neighborhood. So the best education that you can get is coming from the best your neighborhood had to offer. So yeah, it's a self-damning situation. But the journey to make this change, that's going to require actively seeking out new tools in comparison to the ones that you've always had access to. It means that you're going to have to find yourself a mentor who walked this path that you've walked, and it means disseminating and embracing therapy as a tool, not for the weak, but for the strong, who are wise enough to seek help processing the trauma that you once been through. So why do you think that the schools do not teach financial knowledge to the kids? Well, first of all, wealthy people put their kids in school so that wealthy people's kids can learn how to network and socialize. Poor people put their kids in school so that their kids can learn how to follow instructions. Um, Rich people don't necessarily have to count the money. They can pay somebody else to do that. Poor people don't need to know how to count the money because they're expected to spend it all. Rich people make money through the banks that they own for every time you spend too much money and have to pay a late fee or an overdraft fee. When you spend too much money and you can't pay your bills on time and you have to pay interest on the late fee, they profit off of your ability to not be able to manage your finances correctly. Then, because you have a low credit score, you're going to have higher interest rates because you're considered an at-risk investor. They'll still give you the loan, larger down payment, higher interest rates. As long as you're willing to pay for it, they're going to make it seem like your credit score is the problem, not the fact that you've been making poor financial decisions your whole life. That's a really good question. So when you start making changes, what this is going to mean is that you're going to have to constantly expand and consciously, you want to do this consciously, expand your definition of the Black identity, the Blackness. That is not just the hood mentality. It is an art, science, technology, faith, and enterprise model. By exposing yourself to these broader horizons, you give yourself permission to evolve. And this journey of transformation is one of the most difficult and rewarding that you'll ever undertake. It's the process of consciously choosing who you want to be rather than remaining a product of what was done to you. It's about shedding the skin that no longer serves you while honoring the strength that it gave you. The resilience forged in the hood is a powerful force, and it is not something to be ashamed of, but it must be guided by wisdom. It's time to stop letting the resilience opportunity function on autopilot, because that'll keep you stuck in a defensive crouch. It's time to take the wheel. I want to make sure that you guys know that if this message is resonating with you, that you should share your story in the comments. Take the time to like and subscribe and share this story to somebody that you think can use it. Then you want to ask yourself, what part of this journey are we on today? What is the one survival trait that you're learning to reframe into a strength? Your story might be the spark of recognition. Someone else is going to need that level of recognition. So let's build a community around this shared work. And if you're committed to breaking the cycles and building the new legacies, in addition to liking and subscribing to the channel, joining the membership, well, joining in the membership would be the extra best thing, because we actually provide more detailed information to our members. Now, we're going to continue to explore these. So if you're watching us from Twitter or if you're watching us from Twitch, we will be going live at around 11:15 Eastern Standard Time, which is about 10:15 Eastern Standard Time. And we will be providing you guys with practical tools and inspiration for the path that you have ahead of you. So what I want you to remember is this: the hood mentality offers a script for survival. but you are the author of your life. It is up to you to write a new story, a story of success, of healing, of profound and lasting peace. The final most important step is to conduct a personal audit. Take a hard, honest look at your daily thoughts and reactions. Ask yourself with every decision, is this survival or is this self-sabotage? This is the question that you must answer to. And this question will be your compass and your guide, where you, as you forge yourself the key, will begin to unlock a whole new future that you never used to know that you needed access to. This is a lot of information. And one of the reasons why we tell you guys to not emulate this, to pull your pants up, to not portray yourself as that stereotype, is because if you foster a mentality of self-sabotaging behaviors, you will forever be frustrated that you never succeed. But if you alternate, when necessary, the need to keep yourself socially safe versus the need to keep yourself socially respected, which doesn't always happen at the same time, then you'd be able to move forward with a little less catastrophic experience. Now, that's all I have for you guys for tonight. I want to start off by saying, ladies, as long as the situation doesn't make sense, I'm going to keep asking ladies to make it make sense. So ladies, please make it make sense. And fellas, I give you this information to help you guys become higher value men, so you can utilize this information to make the changes in your life that's inside of your control, and then navigate around the things that are not inside of your control. But ladies, this information is not exclusive to the men. While this is a male-driven podcast from the male's perspective, you too can take this information and help yourselves become higher value women. Again, all it takes is for you to prioritize the things in your life that you are 100% control over. With that being said, I want to thank you guys for coming to tonight's show. I'm your host, Xander, where we talk about this, that, and everything in between on the show, this and that. So make sure that as you look for us on Twitter, as you look for us on Twitch, as you look for us on YouTube, make sure that you go and look for this and that and everything in between, because we've always got something great for you every night of the week. Thank you very much, and y'all have a good
chase validation, now I validate myself. That's my personal command. I'm not mounted on higher ground where excellence is found. My potential knows no bounds, raising the bar, breaking ground. I'm not just living, I'm manifesting my vision, cutting through limitations with surgical precision. My expectations are my compass, my respect is my shield to mediocrity and chaos. I will never I'm not just living, I'm manifesting my vision, cutting through limitations with surgical precision. My expectations are my compass, my respect is my shield to mediocrity and chaos. I will never yield.